important figures in the United States and, in fact, the world over. When I was there attending this graduation, the person who was the guest speaker was a former graduate of MIT, and he was the president of the country of Colombia. Just to give you some idea of the people who are graduating from these institutions and what they go on to achieve in their lives. But what was so interesting to me about the graduation from MIT was that, and it's as you might imagine, Mr. Speaker, it's a very large institution. So they were holding their graduation ceremony in the quad. They had literally, for as far as the eye could see, rows and rows of chairs and a very large graduating class. I remember moving in and finding a seat and getting ready to observe the ceremony, and it struck me how different the ceremony, the graduation ceremony from MIT was from my own graduation, because at MIT they started out, the first order of business on the agenda for the graduation at MIT was a report to the shareholders of MIT. They convened the annual meeting of the shareholders of MIT and did a report as part of the graduation ceremony. And this is something that, I mean, the difference was so shocking, but this was the idea was that this was, of course, a private institution, that they talked about the product that they were delivering. It was all coached in terms of a private business. Now, as a model, of course, MIT is one of the most successful institutions in the U.S. and perhaps in the world. But it brings very clearly to the forefront that question of whether or not the road that you want to go down is toward a province that has and lends its name to private institutions, private degree-granting institutions. And I think that the appropriate place for that debate, if that is the manner in which we intend to proceed in this province, then I believe that where that debate ought to take place is not behind the closed doors of the minister's office. It is here in the House of Assembly. So that's the first thing, Mr. Speaker, is that it brings to the forefront of the debate the whole question of public institutions versus private institutions in the delivery of post-secondary education. That's the first thing. The second thing, of course, is the whole question of accountability. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I have been one of those who has been very disappointed with the accountability of this government. And it seems that almost every bill that comes before the House of Assembly is essentially a shell. It is a statement of principles that lays out some broad aspects that the government intends to deal with, and then we get to the regulatory section, which essentially cedes to the minister and the government in council the right to make all of the substantive decisions around the implementation of the general purpose of the bill. And this takes away from the people, it takes away from the legislature that accountability, which I think should be the hallmark of the work that we do here. And I just would point out a number of examples, Mr. Speaker. In the Insurance Act, they talked about what they were going to do in the Insurance Act with respect to the whole question of what minor injuries were, and they brought in regulations that went far beyond what I think anybody expected was going to happen with respect to that act, and that had an extraordinarily punitive effect on many, many injured people in this province. That was something that was done without any real accountability to the House of Assembly. You will remember that they used the order and council process to retroactively approve increases in rates of insurance after they had brought in their freeze. This was part of what happened. They froze insurance rates and then went back retroactively and approved applications that had been before the Utility and Review Board. And what was so insidious about it, Mr. Speaker, was they did it, I think, on December 23rd, just before Christmas, so that people wouldn't notice. And then they, instead of actually putting it in the order in council, they made it part of a schedule that they attached to another order in council, so that you actually had to be lucky enough as a researcher to get in and find it. So you know, that I think heightens people's cynicism and skepticism about the way in which the regulatory powers that the government gives to itself are used or abused in these matters. And you know, so I'm not at all confident that there will be any real debate around these questions when it comes to degree-granting institutions. I'll give you another example, Mr. Speaker. In this House, there were changes and amendments made to the Labour Standards Act that had to do with hours of work and overtime and matters relating to the application of those to particular aspects of our employment across the province. And the Act itself is actually very specific and very clear. And what the government did is, by regulation, go in and essentially roll back what the legislation actually said. And as I've said before, I think in the end, if that ever gets challenged, that those regulations may well find themselves outside of the jurisdiction of the government to do, being in contravention of the Act itself. But that hasn't happened to date. But I think it is a good indication of the willingness of the government to use its regulatory powers in a way that is actually contrary to the Act itself. You know, and perhaps the best and most well-known of these examples of the abuse of regulatory power by the government has to do now with the Uniform Retail Closing Act, where the government has used regulations to essentially do the exact opposite of what the Act sets out. The Act sets out the manner in which retail closings are going to be administered, and what the regulations does is wipes out any restrictions on retail closing at all. And so I just think that this was, as I said, I think that this is the type of thing that, if challenged, would likely result in those regulations being struck down as well. Ironically, those changes to regulations were done in response to changes in regulations that were struck down by the court. So the government has shown a kind of cavalier attitude toward the use of its regulatory powers and a willingness to use it to go well beyond what the intended purpose of the legislation was. And I think that this is part of what feeds the skepticism and cynicism around what would actually happen if this power was given to the minister under this Act. Now, the concern I have on the other side, and I'm trying to give a balanced view of this debate, the problem I have on the other side is, what is the status quo? If we do not have a piece of legislation, is it possible for the government already to move and do that which it's trying to regularize as a result of this Act? I think that's an open question. I think it may well be the case that the government already has the power to do much of what already, or what is encapsulated within the terms of this particular bill. So I'm not going to take up a lot of your time this morning, Mr. Speaker. As I said, I thought my colleagues, in discussing this piece of legislation, they pointed out many of what I consider to be the flaws in the legislation, but I just would make this final point. if the reputation of the province with respect to the granting of degrees is going to be on the line, if the public confidence in those degree granting institutions are going to be on the line, then surely the responsibility for the public debate around the granting of this privilege should rest with the legislature. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Education to close debate on Bill number 5.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank all of the members opposite who took the time to prepare to speak to this bill. And I'm very pleased to note that we are one voice when we speak about the quality of post-secondary education in our province and the enviable place that Nova Scotia holds on that academic landscape. The amendments to this bill do speak to a process that is designed to protect that quality. It speaks to a process that will allow universities to make application, and once that application is received, there will be a complete assessment, and they will be assessed. The application will be assessed on their academic history of the university, the financial stability, the credentials of the professors, and the quality of the programs that they want to offer. And this, I believe, can only serve to protect that enviable place and that high quality that we currently have in our province. I've noted the concerns that were raised with respect to the regulatory powers, and I would suggest that that could be addressed at law amendments. So having said that, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that you call a vote for second reading on Bill number 5, the Degree Granting Act, and move the bill forward to law amendments.
Thank you. The motion before the House for second reading of Bill number 5. Is the House ready for the question? Question. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those against, motion carried.
Bill number 5, an act to amend Chapter 123 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Degree Granting Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill 70, Provincial Fish Act.
Bill number 70. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to rise on this act. Bill 70, an act to declare the brook trout to be the provincial fish of Nova Scotia. There's been many people in this province that have enjoyed many long hours on the streams and lakes of Nova Scotia, fishing for the brook trout, enjoying seeing it jump. And it was also a monitor for our environment too. Where the brook trout can live, it has to be in very clean and pristine water. So it's with great pleasure I move this on, and hopefully we'll have some interesting discussion on it. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to speak about the brook trout or about fishing. I'm not going to tell you a fish story, but I do want to rise in support of the private member that has introduced this bill. I think it's a good one. And I too have many pleasant hours of memories of fishing on the brooks and streams and rivers of this province. And I think it's a good choice. The brook trout, or the brookie as he's sometimes known, is a good choice. There's about 20 species of inland fish in this province, and this is probably the best choice out of those 20. The brook trout, as you know, Mr. Speaker, is I think it's a beautiful fish. It ranges up to is 2 feet long, but it's normally less than a foot in most of our streams and brooks in this province. And it's sort of a fish with a dark back and a light underbelly, sort of a cream or an orange or a red speckled trout, sometimes called the speckled trout as well. And it's actually not a trout at all. It's actually a char, and its scientific name escapes me at the moment. But it's a fish that likes clear, cold water, and I know the Trout Nova Scotia, it's a private group of anglers that has worked hard to improve the habitat for trout in this province. And also with the inland fisheries, the Office of the Department of, Office of the Department of Fisheries, I think it is. They've worked on habitat improvement, and just recently there was a habitat stamp that was added to the fishing license, that money that went to improve the streams and brooks and rivers in this province, and I think that's a good thing. Adopt a Stream is the official name of the program, I think. I know the Pictou County Rivers Association has done a lot of work in our county and Pictou County on that particular project. And every April 1st, I and many other anglers in this province look forward to getting out there and going after the brook trout. It's economically valuable to Nova Scotia. Something like $20 million is the income that's produced from those that, the anglers that spend the money in this province. So I, again, Mr. Speaker, I think it's a good choice. I stand in support of the private member that brought this forward under private member's bill. And I commend my colleagues to this bill and hope that they too will be able to support it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's very honoured to stand and speak for a couple of minutes on the proposed bill. And I want to thank the member opposite, the member for Preston, for bringing this bill forward to bring a discussion on a fish, Mr. Speaker, that many people have spent hours and hours trying to find that elusive fish. I know the honourable member for Cumberland North spends a huge amount of time playing in the rivers of Nova Scotia trying to find some of those elusive fish. Mr. Speaker, I do want to question, though, just for a few moments of why an inland fish? Why couldn't we have taken maybe an ocean-faring fish? Why couldn't it have been a haddock? Why couldn't it have been a cod? Why couldn't it have been, we have lots of fish that of course, also contribute to the well-being of Nova Scotians financially, to the way of life of Nova Scotians as well. But I do enjoy and fully support the idea of the brook trout and where it resides in our rivers and byways, of course, through Nova Scotia. Ultimately, I myself am not an angler. I've tried. I do believe sometimes I can't sit long enough to stand and throw that line out. It seems like something I would rather do than some other things I tend to enjoy in life. But ultimately, maybe I can take up with the member opposite. Maybe we can go out fishing someday, and he can show me exactly how to do it. Because the times as a child, outside of a few rainbow trout, I haven't been able to catch a brook trout yet. And maybe someday we'll get around to learning how to do that. Maybe the lure is wrong. Maybe the fishing wrong. Maybe I'm in a river. There's no fish. I'm not too sure. I know in our neck of the woods, Mr. Speaker, that inland fish are a tad scarce. Whether it be on the Tusket, whether it be on the river through Salmon River, in the constituency of Clare. Unfortunately, maybe I come from a time when maybe fish weren't so plentiful as maybe some of the members opposite come from a different generation than I. Such as the member for Timberlea Prospect, who I'm sure is a fair amount older than I am. He does have long fish stories, which I'm sure are important. But, Mr. Speaker, I know that members of this side of the House are enjoying the idea, or really thinking of the idea of the brook trout of being a provincial fish. Of course, we have provincial flowers, and I think we actually now have a provincial fishing fly. I think which I forget exactly what it was. We have a dog, which of course was bred in my constituency in Little River. Of course, the Little River duck toller. The Nova Scotia duck toller now, I think, is the common name for it. So, all to the support of our great province, and I look forward to seeing the further discussions on this bill as it goes forward. Mr. Speaker, I will now take my place, and maybe somebody else can have this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask the honourable member for Preston to close debate on Bill number 70. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do appreciate the support from the other parties on this bill. And indeed, as I was growing up as a child, when a lot of other people were playing baseball and doing other things, I was on the rivers and the lakes fishing. and it has a very special place for me. And anybody that spends those hours there, they're so quiet and so pleasant, and the time is just evaporates on you. And I'll take the honourable member on a fishing trip anytime he wants, and I guarantee you'll catch a brook trout, and I can probably take you in your own area and catch a brook trout there as well. So it's a real pleasure to do this, and anyone that hasn't experienced the quiet of a stream and a lake is really missing something in life that is very enjoyable. And a lot of people spend a lot of time doing this, and indeed it's nice to see Trout Nova Scotia and other organizations now starting really to work hard to preserve the habitat and make sure that for many generations to come we'll have this fish and many other fish in our communities and all of the wildlife we have that will help make our province a better place and a stronger place to live. And with that, I'd move the second reading of Bill number 70 and an act to declare the brook trout to be the provincial fish of Nova Scotia.
Thank you. The motion before the House is for second reading of Bill number 70, the Provincial Fish Act. Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those against, motion carried.
Bill 70, entitled an act to declare the brook trout to be the provincial fish of Nova Scotia.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill 69, Maintenance Enforcement Act.
Bill number 69, the Maintenance Enforcement Act. The Honourable, the member for Preston.
On behalf of my colleague, our leader, I'd like to move Bill 68, the Maintenance Enforcement Act. 69, sorry about that, 69.
Thank you. The Honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand here today and speak on Bill 69, which deals with the Maintenance Enforcement Act. The Act, in the explanatory notes, does set out a method for the government to refuse fathers that have not made their enforcement payments. It allows them to refuse these dads from either getting their fishing and hunting license, excuse me, or it allows them to cancel them if they already have them, if they're not making the enforcement payments. It also allows the government to withhold money over $1,000 if it's won by these dads through the Lottery Corporation. So the government still has to set out ways to implement a system which allows them to do that with the licenses, and it also has to negotiate with the Atlantic Lottery Corporation. We don't know how they're going to do that. It's not set out here in the bill. But I wanted to stand and talk about this this morning, Mr. Speaker, because I do have a couple of ladies in my constituency that indeed have faced this issue with the lack of payments from their either ex-spouses, the fathers of their children. And I really don't understand how not letting these dads go fishing or hunting is going to put food on the tables for these ladies or pay their rent. So I'm a little bit, I don't really know how that's really going to monetarily help these ladies. Now, the Lottery Corporation, anything over $1,000, I don't understand if it was, why isn't it $500? And give, where did that amount come from? If somebody can't pay the rent and it's $625, they could use that $1,000. So I'm not sure, how much of the money is going to go to the mothers. I've actually had one instance in my constituency where the mom, the employer of the dad, the father of the children, actually was making deductions off of his paycheck for renting of a rental facility that he had, and also for costs that apparently this fellow had incurred at his place of employment. And so when those deductions were made off the check, he decided he didn't have enough money to pay her the enforcement payment. And that's when she came to me for help. So she was having a problem actually contacting, going through all the red tape, because apparently when you call, you have a file number, and you call, you never ever get to speak to a real person when you're calling through there. Now our offices can make it through, but people have to leave a message, their file number, social insurance number, all these things. And you wait for a call back. And this is like, it's telephone tag, and we've all played that, all of us in here. And telephone tag's a little bit easier for us. It's not quite as easy for constituents. So in the end, as far as I know, it worked out. The appropriate people sent a letter to the employer saying, no, the enforcement payment comes off first. But this is happening. If it's happening to one person, it's happening to others. So I don't know how the government's going to address that specific issue. But these ladies, one of them, in fact, Mr. Speaker, is trying to go back and get further her education. And she actually, in fact, Mr. Speaker, wants to become a lawyer. And she wants to work in the system to help fight the injustices that are being done for these moms that are trying to get these payments from the father of their children. And these moms are struggling with trying to pay the rent, trying to put food on the table, buying school supplies. They're having to go to the food bank and things like this because they simply cannot get the money from these guys, okay? And, there's other ways the government could be dealing with this situation, and it's through providing easily accessible child care facilities in neighborhoods in which these ladies live. They could be addressing going after Nova Scotia Power on these power rate hikes because these people can't afford to pay their heat sometimes because the fathers are not paying their enforcement payments. I mean, lowering the cost of post-secondary education. I'm not going to go into all the ways that the government could be helping these ladies, but I just fail to see how, I mean, I guess it's not going to hurt anything, but how the guy not going fishing or hunting is going to put food or pay the rent, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I'm going to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's a pleasure to rise today in response to an opposition bill, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to point out some comments made just a few minutes ago that members should realize this is not a government bill that's being brought forward, but it's a bill by the members of the opposition. So some of those issues that have been talked about are issues that actually would cause us, we believe, some great concern in regards to the implementation of this bill. Particularly the issue around tracking and how, because presently, my understanding is that there is not a process in place that would allow for the maintenance enforcement program or any other government department to be able to determine how would you be able to track those types of cases that's being suggested in the bill. So that's one of the concerns we have. But, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise today in support of this amendment, which will further strengthen our maintenance enforcement program here in this province. The maintenance enforcement program began in January 1996, and it was as a result of the need to address difficulties experienced by spouses, Mr. Speaker, and children who are not receiving their court-ordered maintenance payments. This program, Mr. Speaker, is mandatory, meaning that any support order that's issued in Nova Scotia is automatically registered with the maintenance enforcement program. Mr. Speaker, the program is offered through 7 offices around the province with an annual budget of $2.1 million. Currently, at this time, there are more than 17,000 active cases within the maintenance enforcement program in this province. And as in Nova Scotia, not unlike other provinces, Mr. Speaker, the vast majority of these maintenance orders are specifically for children. Approximately half of these cases are straightforward payments that do not require enforcement measures or intervention by the maintenance enforcement program because they are in compliance. In some of these cases, Mr. Speaker, the programs act as a buffer when there's a negative relationship at that time. But, Mr. Speaker, when enforcement is required, we are able to take steps to enforce payment. Currently, to enforce orders, we are able to garnish income sources in many ways, including some of which are through wages, bank accounts, rental income, federal income interception, for example, income tax or unemployment or GST rebates, liens on both real and personal property, and demands for information, payer examinations, collapsing of pensions, and cancellation of driver's license privileges in this province. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia also has reciprocal agreements in place with the rest of Canada, the United States, and many foreign countries. Last year, we collected approximately $53 million on behalf of clients in this province. Mr. Speaker, this is out of approximately $67 million owed by payers, which represents a 78% collection rate in the province. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that this rate compares favorably with the other Canadian jurisdictions across this country. The Maintenance Enforcement Program has a significant impact on the lives of Nova Scotians involved in maintenance orders. We've made a number of program and legislative improvements since it was introduced 10 years ago, and we continue to work towards ensuring we have the best system possible in this country. In fact, Mr. Speaker, last year, 5 additional positions were created within the Maintenance Enforcement Program. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the government, I certainly support this step to add another enforcement measure in regards to the collection of maintenance enforcement orders that are levied in the courts in this province. Mr. Speaker, we need to do all we can to make sure families receive their payments and that people are living up to their court order obligations. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that this House and all members know I have a lot of respect for all those individuals who are working within the Maintenance Enforcement Program across this province. We have a lot of dedicated people who work very, very hard and work within a very trying, most times, situations to ensure that families, and especially children, receive the monies that's owed to them. And I think, Mr. Speaker, it's incumbent that we as legislators acknowledge that those dedicated people do very well in regards to what's being offered to them. Mr. Speaker, I know that I've heard some comments today about people not being able to get through to those workers. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I've had, in my own situation, 100% cooperation with all those folks, and they have returned their calls. When they're contacted and asked to return calls and respond to concerns on behalf of constituents, they do respond, Mr. Speaker. They do respond. I think they are very dedicated employees, and I think they deserve the respect of all legislators and absolutely of this House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I certainly, on behalf of the government, support, in principle, these amendments being put forward by the Liberal Party. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will offer our support for Bill number 69 being sent on to law amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Motion before the House for second reading on Bill number 69, Maintenance Enforcement Act. Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Those against? Motion carried.
Bill 69, title and act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Maintenance Enforcement Act.
Or that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I call for a brief recess at this moment.
We'll have a short recess. Has been called. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion carried. We'll have a short recess. Order, please. We'll call the House back to order, please. The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill 68, Pension Benefits Act.
Thank you. Bill number 68 for second reading. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Speaker. It's a it's Friday, so it's bizarre things can happen on a Friday. But Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure for me to stand here and move second reading of Bill 68, and I certainly thank my colleagues for moving Bill 67 prior to this, and even the applause as I stand for Bill 68. So, Speaker, quite quickly, Bill 68 is meant to amend the Pension Benefits Act so that individuals can access their locked-in RRSPs, registered retirement saving plans, when there is deemed to be considerable financial hardship. Now, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that this is legislation that came forward as a result of, in my own case as an MLA for Richmond, at least 2 to 3 instances where constituents came forward with the fact that they did have, in one case, significant amount of savings in RRSPs that they were unable to access under the existing legislation here in Nova Scotia. Just for members' information, currently right now in our province, individuals can only access locked-in RRSPs in 2 instances. A, 10 years before the established retirement age, and B, if there is deemed to be considerable shortened life expectancy. So I think we can read from that, Mr. Speaker, is basically if someone is suffering from a life-threatening illness, there's a means of being able to unlock those. But the question becomes, is that enough to encompass the different circumstances people find themselves in? And Speaker, I've had a variety, as I mentioned before, in my own constituency. I had a gentleman who had been a trades person all of his life, and he was on Canada Pension Disability. He is suffering from various ailments, and he did have one of these locked-in RSPs as part of his pension plan with the union. And it took us approximately 5 years before we were able to get him access to that money, knowing his medical condition, knowing he was on disability, and that certainly brought to me the challenges we face here in our province. On the flip side, I also had a lady, middle-aged, in fact probably younger than that, with a couple of young children, and she had been let go from her employment, and she was going through hard times, and she was facing bankruptcy, the loss of her home, the loss of her vehicle, and yet she had $70,000 in locked-in RRSPs from her previous employment. So can you imagine that a single mother with children was going to be put out of her home, lose the vehicle, and yet she had $70,000 sitting in locked-in RRSPs, which was impossible under our legislation for her to be able to get any portion of that. Mr. Speaker, what Bill 68 will do is would allow the Superintendent of Pensions to unlock the locked-in RRSPs if there is considerable financial hardship. The Superintendent will accept applications and make the determination pursuant to the regulations outlined once the bill is approved by the legislature. Mr. Speaker, the instances where access for considerable financial hardship may include, for example, in the legislation where it talks about the possible loss of the owner's principal residence, or where the owner could face eviction if a certain debt remains unpaid. There's also where the owner, his or her spouse or dependent, has incurred or will incur medical expenses for treatment of the illness or physical disability of any of them, and the expenses claimed are reasonable and not subject to reimbursement for any other source. There's a whole host of new provisions that would be available now to the superintendent. Mr. Speaker, for the information members of the House, this type of legislation is most notably already in 2 jurisdictions in Canada, Alberta and Ontario. Since the creation of the Ontario provision up until 2005, the government in that province has unlocked roughly $500 million of previously locked-in pension money. Mr. Speaker, we do recognize that this is a significant amount of money which has been accessed by these individuals who have been faced with financial hardships and need access to their own assets immediately. There can be immediate damage which may have extreme long-term consequences for individuals when they fall into bad times financially. And we certainly know of some of the examples that I've given before. Mr. Speaker, people under the significant financial hardship, their immediate concern is certainly not their retirement, and being able to access these funds may be a necessity for them. Access to their paid pension benefits or RSPs may be able to help them move onto better financial times. With government financial support not being sufficient at times, there may be no other alternative. Mr. Speaker, we are certainly a party that's promoting that Nova Scotians do have savings for their retirement, but at the same time, it's important that we as legislators and as a province recognize that Nova Scotians will sometimes find themselves in a situation, whether through illness or whether through other circumstances, that they face extremely tough financial times, and yet we need to allow a system where the superintendent of pensions would be able to evaluate those circumstances and determine what course of action should be followed. So, Mr. Speaker, it's certainly our hope through Bill 68 that we are going to be able to generate some debate amongst members here in the House. I do hope that members who have been able to incur these types of situations will certainly be aware of the importance of this legislation. Our caucus has heard from a number of financial planners who have congratulated us for bringing this matter forward, for the fact that Nova Scotia had such strict rules in the past, and that this actually would be a means of being able to open up our legislation a bit more carefully. Now, Mr. Speaker, my understanding just as of this morning, there may be some concerns about other forms of pensions that might be impacted by this legislation. Allow me to say right now, we are very open to hearing any concerns about Bill 68. If there are concerns about other pension plans, we're more than open to hearing those. I believe all members of the House would agree this is a bill which is meant to try to help Nova Scotians who find themselves in extremely difficult circumstances. And I don't think anybody in this House would disagree with that. If there is amendments that can make this bill stronger, that can protect certain pension plans, we are more than open to that, and allow me to give that message to all of my colleagues today. We are open to that. We are pleased that the government has already previously indicated an interest in seeing such legislation go forward because of the principle that's trying to be achieved here in our province. We don't want to see a situation where Nova Scotians end up spending all of their savings for their retirement and then find themselves in financial difficulty in their retirement. But at the same time, let's make sure we allow a system to be put in place through the superintendent that can use common sense and good judgment to address people's specific financial needs that they may find themselves in. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I again thank the government for calling this legislation and do look forward to the comments from honourable colleagues in this House, and as well look forward to the law amendments process and any comments or concerns which might come from that, and more importantly, any abilities to make this legislation even stronger. So with that, Mr. Speaker, again, I'm pleased to move second reading of Bill 68.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I would like to say to the honourable member, with respect to the sentiments that he has expressed with respect to why this bill has been brought forward, that certainly those are sentiments that are shared, I think, quite widely by members of this legislature. There probably isn't anybody here who hasn't been approached by a member of their constituency who is in dire financial straits and facing real hardship, and the circumstances are so compelling that we don't all relate to the difficulties of our constituents around these situations. But, Mr. Speaker, I guess we would differ from the honourable member in the remedies that are being proposed with Bill 68. Mr. Speaker, you know, I tend to feel that social programs in this country have been eviscerated at both a federal and a provincial level, And quite often, this is why people are in the situations that they are in. Our unemployment insurance program is a joke for people who become unemployed. And certainly, other forms of income support are completely inadequate to support people who end up in dire straits. So, you know, the question is, what are the remedies that need to be in place to protect people when they face catastrophic drug costs, when they have illnesses, when they find themselves thrown out of the labor force through no fault of their own, Mr. Speaker. I want to say right at the outset that we had an extensive conversation in the NDP caucus with respect to Bill 68. It's not the first time that this caucus has had lots of discussion around a bill called Bill 68. But certainly with respect to this particular Bill 68, we had a lot of discussion, and there was sort of there was anonymity in our, we were unanimous in our thinking about this bill. We think this is not good public policy, Mr. Speaker, and I'll tell you a bit more why we think this is not good public policy. Mr. Speaker, there has been a period in the history of our province and our country when seniors were among the most poor people that you could find in our communities. And that changed with an emphasis on pension reform, both public and private. And over the years, one of the pieces of good public policy was in fact to encourage employers and employees to contribute to pension plans and to lock in those contributions so that they would be available for people in their retirement, and so that people would not be tempted to dip into those savings from time to time when they were experiencing some financial squeeze in their households or what have you. And face it, Mr. Speaker, the pressures on people today to look to those pension savings are probably greater than they've ever been. We have a transformed labor market where there's no such thing as a job for life anymore. So many, many members of our labor force face the ongoing insecurity of being in and out of the labor force. For older workers, and an older worker now is not somebody who's in their 60s, they can be in their late 40s. An older worker may be facing a very difficult prospects for getting back into the labor force, certainly at the same rate of pay and with the same kinds of benefits that they may have previously enjoyed in a job. And so these circumstances put a great deal of pressure on workers and on earners, and it makes the pressure to access those pension contributions greater. There's no question about it. But Mr. Speaker, you have to ask yourself what will happen to those people when they turn 65? What sources of income will they have to draw from if they exhaust their pension savings early in life? The provisions today in our legislation, in fact, allow for pensions that are locked in to be released under certain conditions. if the person is within 10 years of retirement. And I think, in fact, Mr. Speaker, there's a bit of a ceiling. If the amount of money that is in an RRSP, for example, isn't greater than $15,000, I believe that actually you can get access to small amounts of money. But, Mr. Speaker, I have to say, I'm flabbergasted when I hear that in the province of Ontario, $500 million has been released from what previously were locked-in plans. That is a significant amount of pension income that would be there and available for people in their retirement. And what will happen to people who exhaust their private plans? You know, the public system has essentially not kept up very well with the real cost of living. We've seen very, very small annual increases in both the Canada Pension Plan and in the Old Age Security Plan. Not so long ago, there was a report that was released by Statistics Canada on the pension programs and plans across the country. And Mr. Speaker, the province of Nova Scotia did not do very well in that report with respect to the extent to which people have coverage in pension plans, in company pension plans. And so this means that people, a large number of people in our province, are really left to their own individual plans and investments in our RSPs. This legislation will mean that people will have greater access, and the temptation can be very great, Mr. Speaker, to look at extracting the resources that are there when people need new things, need to be able to meet the pressing demands of their household budgets. You know, people get into trouble in terms of their finances when we see increased costs of heat and electricity with no programs from government to assist people in terms of conservation and reducing the cost of electricity or reducing the cost of home heat. People get into trouble increasingly in this province because they're out of pocket for health care expenditures, pharmacare, for co-pays, for premiums, purchasing private health care, private home care, these kinds of situations that come from illness, catastrophic drug needs. This is where people increasingly are placed in jeopardy, and if they have a small household income, monthly income, the temptation to look at their retirement savings that are currently locked in and are there for the benefit of having an adequate income in their retirement years is very, very great, Mr. Speaker. And who can blame them? But the response is not to download these costs onto the backs of individual people with retirement savings in the province. The response should be to improve catastrophic drug plan access in the province, to provide those affordable housing and conservation measures to allow people to realize savings in their heat and electricity, to have a realistic assessment cap, which we don't have right now. These are the reasons why people are getting into financial trouble. They can't afford their property taxes. They can't afford to pay the heat. They can't afford the rising electrical costs. They increasingly are expected to pay for more and more health care needs outside of the public system. And in desperation, where do they turn? They turn to their retirement savings, they come to their MLAs, they ask us to assist them in getting access to those funds, and it's very, very difficult for us to say, you know, that's your money and you can't have it. That is your money and you can't have it. And, you know, the member from Richmond says we shouldn't have to say that, and I agree we shouldn't have to say that. We should be able to point to catastrophic drug plan coverage and be able to assist people, and we should be able to help them get access to long-term care, and we should be able to have available a strong social safety net. And, you know, that's what we should be proposing, rather than saying to someone, your choice is to be poor now or to be poor in your retirement years. And that essentially what this bill will do. It says, okay, you're in a financial hardship now, and we will make it possible for you to have this, but you're going to face financial hardship in your senior years. And what does that solve, Mr. Speaker? That solves absolutely nothing. It's a Band-Aid, really. So, Mr. Speaker, this is our concern. We understand completely those terrible situations that have been presented to us by people whose backs are up against the wall financially. They're looking at perhaps losing their homes, losing their cars, going bankrupt, being evicted. We've seen all of these situations, Mr. Speaker. There isn't probably anybody in here who hasn't seen this situation. But how do we properly address those situations? Is eviscerating the vested pension income of individuals when they're 30, 40, 50 years old the answer, so that when they are 65 or 70, they no longer have available to them the amortized income that would come from having left those funds there to be used in the way in which they were intended, and to be used in the way that we generally had consensus was absolutely necessary, and that is, you know, saving for retirement, to eliminate the insecurity and the inadequacy of income that many older people end up having in their retirement years. So, Mr. Speaker, the NDP caucus do not support this bill. The NDP caucus will not be voting for this bill, but we will not stand in the way of this bill going forward either. We recognize that it does have the support of the government members as well as the Liberal caucus. We do have other concerns, Mr. Speaker. The member from Richmond spoke about what the circumstances, the prescribed circumstances would be, but they do not appear anywhere in this bill. What this bill does is this bill says that somebody who has a locked-in RRSP retirement account or a life income fund can make application to the superintendent of pensions. And the superintendent of pensions will satisfy, in this case herself, that there is an existence of prescribed circumstances that constitute considerable financial hardship, and will release either a portion or all of the funds. The honourable member from Richmond talked about what those circumstances might be, and he indicated that illness might be one of those circumstances, that falling on hard financial times might be one of those circumstances, and I'm not really sure what that means. To me, that really gives a very broad set of parameters to the superintendent of pensions. I'm not sure that she would really like to have those, but I guess she follows the legislation as prescribed by this House and the regulations that will be done subsequently. But, Mr. Speaker, I think, you know, if we are going to have this significant, and it is a very significant change in public policy with respect to pension benefits, then it would be, I think, very important to have a little more tightness in the language of this particular act that would indicate exactly what falling on hard financial times means, because to me that is a very broad, it's a very broad kind of idea, and subject to, I think, a lot of different opinions. What could be hard financial times for some person may not be considered hard financial times for others. And so, Mr. Speaker, these I think very much are the concerns that we have. I think it's disappointing in a way to me that members of the Liberal Party, a party that once stood for social protections for people who become unemployed, people who experience illness and have financial problems because of that their vision or their imagination is focused in this way, that it's focused on offloading more responsibility onto individual people and their households, that the concern for the long-term impact of this kind of public policy isn't taken into consideration, and that on the basis of those few extreme cases that we see in our MLA offices, that we would make such a fundamental change to our Pension Benefits Act that would open the door to the weakening of legislation that has really guaranteed, I think, in some ways, that there be greater protection for pension benefits and for having adequate financial means in one's retirement years. And I also know that there will be, no doubt, people in the public who will have great concern about what this will mean now for the pressures on the various kinds of income funds and RRSP plans. This may open a much larger can of worms than the honourable member was anticipating. At any rate, we have this bill here. It has been called by the government. The government, though, are somewhat notorious for bringing forward opposition bills and then never really putting them into effect. They fail to proclaim, they fail to develop regulations and bring those forward in a timely fashion. And I don't know exactly what their intention is, if they in fact will reflect on this legislation a bit more, whether they will consult a bit more broadly, whether they will, in fact, do some analysis with respect to what the real impact could be on this, on people in the province who have retirement plans. So, Mr. Speaker, I think those pretty much sum up the concerns I have and we have here in this caucus. There are so many problems that do need to be addressed in terms of trying to support and mitigate financial hardship for people. Certainly, one of the things that I always think about is the family, the household where you have a problem gambler. And, you know, sometimes we bury our heads in the sand, Mr. Speaker, and we don't want to bring this problem out of the closet. But, you know, it's all too common in this province that there are people who have serious gambling addictions, and they exhaust the available income, regular income to the household. They exhaust those RRSPs that aren't vested. And I ask you, Mr. Speaker, what in the world are we thinking when we're making it possible to get access to even further resources that could really seriously hurt a household and a family? So I do have serious concerns about this bill, and we here in the caucus have concern about this bill, and certainly other members of our caucus may want to speak further to their concerns, and I'm grateful to have had an opportunity to put those comments on the record. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and just would like to rise to speak a few minutes to this act as the Minister under whom the Pension Benefits Act resides. I want to commend the Honourable Member for bringing this forward. I know it comes out of his passion and concern for those exceptional circumstances that he's already alluded to, that all of us as MLAs face, where we feel that perhaps if we had some more tools at our disposal, we might be able to help these people. And I think from listening to the Honourable Member that he sees it as exceptional circumstances and not as a sort of broad rule. And so with that, with those few comments and some of the concerns that have been raised opposite, I think that the member has stated that he's open to amendments as it goes forward. I'd like to commend him for his concern for people, and certainly happy on the government side for it to go forward to law amendments.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand here this afternoon and speak on Bill 68, Pension Benefits Act. Mr. Speaker, when I stand here and listen to my honourable colleague beside me talk about an issue that's very important to everybody, which is really how is this bill going to affect the seniors in the province of Nova Scotia? Seniors are living in a time when they may have some money set aside, they may have some funds that they've you know, put away in a little nest egg, but they are still on a fixed income. Even though this money is over here, they're dealing with a fixed income on a monthly basis. But unfortunately, the costs of living are continuing to rise. And unfortunately, when our seniors should be enjoying the golden years of their life, a lot of them aren't. They're indeed at home, putting on layers and layers of clothing, trying to stay warm. Indeed, they're trying to figure out how they're going to replace the car that needs to be replaced. They're trying to figure out how are they going to put that roof on. I don't know if you've had a roof put on lately, but I have, and it's over $4,000. So if they're on a fixed income, is this bill now saying that even though the money is locked into an RSP, the superintendent of pensions will look at the various circumstances of hardship and release a certain amount of that money? And is a new roof a hardship? I don't know, Mr. Speaker. I mean, are these the kinds of, what hardships are we talking about? And if you don't have $4,000 to put on a roof, I guess that is a hardship. So we've got seniors in the province that, and I know one that has just recently put up a portion of land that they owned that they would have liked to have seen passed down to a family member or maybe a grandchild. We've got seniors in the province that would like to be able to put money in their grandchildren's education funds. But if they're dealing with issues in the province such as the rising cost of electricity, and if you're talking about, your electricity rising by a certain percentage every year, 8% now, 9% next year, 9% the next, 10%, who knows where that's going to end. The government needs to be doing things to help seniors live on a day-to-day basis. They need to be doing things that, are really proactive. They need to come up with remedies that really are going to help our seniors stay in their homes, not have to sell off portions of the family land, whether it's a recreational land, whether it's land that they've farmed, maybe it's wood lots. Why should our seniors have to dig into a fund that's put aside for when they are going to retire, for when they're supposed to enjoy life? They're the ones that worked for us. They're the ones that built the province for us to enjoy. And now we're saying, well, we can't fix all these other things, but you know what? We're going to let you go to the superintendent of pensions and, I don't know, state your case either on paper, verbally, I don't know how it's going to be done, and say, well, here, take some of this money. Well, if we're going to allow seniors to do that, or, when they reach a certain age and they're going to spend it before they're 65 now, if they're taking little bits and pots, and how often are they going to be able to do this? And if they're taking money out of this pot, and it's not going to be in the pot later. And as we've seen, if the cost of living keeps rising and rising, and certainly their homes are going to keep needing maintenance, and the cost of their drugs are going up, if anybody's canvassed their neighborhoods lately and you've got seniors, you'll come upon people that are cutting their pills in half, and that in fact aren't filling certain prescriptions. There's people that are very concerned about the cost of the co-pays on pharmacare and the cost of the premiums. That to some people, that's a hardship, Mr. Speaker. Okay, that's a hardship there. Who's going to decide? And how are they going to decide what's a hardship and what's not? There's, people moving on into the senior years that are losing their jobs. It's not that easy to find a new job when you reach at any age, but as you age, we all know that this is what's happening. So we've got seniors that I think, Mr. Speaker, are being basically forced out of their homes, forced to sell portions of their land. We've got seniors that are thinking, well, my mortgage is paid off, but I can sell this house and I can get X amount of dollars for this, and I'm going to have to move in an apartment. Seniors should not have to give up their home. If somebody's been living in a home for 30, 40 years, 20 years, I don't think because they can't afford to pay their Nova Scotia power bill, or it's becoming more and more a hardship, and they're sinking into debt, and they're going, to the credit union and getting money for this and that and the other thing. Why should they have to give up a family home and move into a little apartment somewhere? Now, there are seniors that they want to do that, or they want to live in a condominium, but I think it's all about choice, isn't it? And I don't think these people that are going to be accessing these funds early are doing it because they choose to do it, right? It's all about now it's a hardship because things have gotten so bad in this province that this is what we're saying to our people of this province, that don't worry, we're not going to fix these things, but you can go out and drag some money out of a fund that should be there for you to enjoy with your grandkids, your children, when you're 65 and older. I mean, there's all kinds of things that keep rising in cost, Mr. Speaker. You've got your home insurance, your car insurance. They're constantly sending you out notices saying, well, I think you should have more of this. You need more liability insurance. You need more liability insurance for your home. You need more for your car. You need flood damage insurance. You should up that. It's only another $60 a year. Well, for somebody on a fixed income, that $60, where are they going to find it from? It's going to come out of their food allowance or their personal, allowance, or maybe their entertainment. We already know a lot of older people are living in their homes now. They're going to bed early at night because they can't afford to keep the heat on. There's seniors that are closing off portions of their home because they simply cannot afford to heat that portion of their home. Why are we not providing seniors with interest-free loans to upgrade their insulation in their homes? Why are we not doing something as proactive as that? Why are we not building more affordable housing so that seniors that maybe can't take care of their properties anymore, or find it's too much of a hardship to do that, can find a nice residence to live in? Why are we not building seniors complexes in this province? I've got seniors that live in my constituency, and there's a couple of nice apartment complexes. But you know what? There's a 2-year waiting list to get into one of those places. Now, what's that all about? I mean, why are we not investing in opportunities to build places for our seniors to live in if they choose not to live in their own home because perhaps they may have a disability, or they may just find that's too much work to get out and mow the lawn and shovel the snow. They can't afford a snowblower, these sorts of things. So seniors apartment complexes, there's some great ones. I have a fantastic one, in my riding. But Mr. Speaker, I don't see the government moving forward with these kinds of initiatives. And, nobody else seems to see them either. But what are we saying here? We're really saying that don't worry about paying your property taxes. Don't worry about that. You're not going to have to sell off your property now. You're not going to have to sell your house now. You're going to have to do these things. Because now you can go and take this money out. Well, when the money's gone, the money's gone. It's not going to be there. And we all know everybody's living longer. I mean, the age, people are just living longer. So they're going to need that money down the road. Yet people, still are going to be accessing our hospitals. And why are we not building long-term care facilities? Our senior population is rising. We've got out-migration. The people that would have been left here to have children, they're not even going to be here. Who's going to look after the seniors? Who's going to provide the tax base to build, expand on our hospitals, to expand on our education system? I don't know who it's going to be. But, Mr. Speaker, I have to go back to, what is going to be left if we let people access this fund? I mean, we can see, where maybe, people have good intentions, but I don't think it's been thought out enough, and I think, something needs to be done with this bill. So, with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my place. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend the leader of the Liberal Party for bringing this forward, and the member for Richmond. I think this bill is well motivated. I haven't been an MLA for very long, but I do know that we've seen lots of cases where people have come to us where they've gone into tremendous financial difficulty, usually driven by the loss of a job or the loss of their health, and they find themselves in a desperate situation. So as my colleagues here on the side have said, we have no problem, with the motivation for this bill. But we do have some significant concern about the implications of this bill if we decide to act on it. The bill, the Act as it stands already allows for people within 10 years of retirement to encroach on those funds. The Act already allows for people with life-threatening or terminal illnesses to encroach on those funds, and we agree with those principles. The problem here is with the discretion that's granted to the superintendent of pensions to determine what constitutes a prescribed circumstance of considerable financial hardship. And because of that ambiguity as to what constitutes considerable financial hardship, we have a problem with that. The member described some of those circumstances earlier on, and I'm not sure if those would constitute considerable financial hardship over the long term. And the bill, in effect, confuses short-term financial hardship with long-term financial hardship, and I think those kinds of situations should be spelled out more clearly. But the bigger problem we have with this, Mr. Speaker, is that it essentially absolves the state and the government of society in general of any responsibility to deal with the people who fall into these circumstances. It really represents a clawback, in other words. It forces people to claw back on their pensions. It forces people to liquidate their assets, to deal with a temporary, short-term, or even a catastrophic difficulty. And we believe that people who fall into these circumstances need more support than that, and to say, you know, we go back to a centuries-old situation where people were forced into poorhouses and forced into the street if they fell into these difficulties. We believe that if we really do care about people who fall into these situations, we should look at their unique situation. We should say, perhaps we can provide them with free financial advice to see how they can organize their situations to deal with it, especially if we're dealing with the short-term problem. Perhaps if the problem is with the cost of prescription drugs, we should say we will provide you with a farmer care program that will support you and your children. Perhaps we should say if you need support at home, we will provide home care, that we will have nursing visits, we will have Meals on Wheels. Perhaps if the problem is a transition problem with education, we would provide employment support and income assistance for retraining so that you can get another job, and that we will support you through the transition program. Perhaps if the problem is childcare, we will say we'll provide childcare for you so that you can deal with a loved one who's sick, or you can go out to a university or a college or to get an education. Perhaps we can say we'll provide transportation for you to get to and from jobs or to these situations. Maybe we can do something about meeting your energy costs or your home heating oil costs. Maybe we can do something about property assessments so that you're not house rich and cash poor. I know, Mr. Speaker, that these are the types of problems that people encounter. I was in this situation myself not that long ago. My partner and I worked at St. Mary's, and she faced a life-threatening illness, and she was forced to leave her job, and we were forced to leave town, and we lost both our incomes. And we spent an awful lot of money, Mr. Speaker, and fortunately we got some good advice at the time and said, don't liquidate your pensions, don't use up your assets, even though at the time we could have. But we would have been in a very desperate situation, Mr. Speaker, if we had availed ourselves of that option at that time. So there's a very good reason why we have established these pension policies to protect people in the long term. We agree that the loss of a job, the loss of your health, the breakdown in your family situation, all of these situations can lead you to desperation. It's the remedy that we have a problem with, and we believe that the cure here is worse than the disease. I agree with the member for Richmond when he talks about single parents and he talks about the medical conditions that some people face. But this is not a solution. Leaving it to the discretion of the superintendent is a problem. Describing what constitutes these hardship situations is a problem. We don't disagree then, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, that we do need to do more for people who fall into these difficulties. Many of these difficulties that are really because of situations well beyond their control. And we do have a duty to do something for them. And there are many, many more options that we have that we will deal with. And our problem with this is that it doesn't look for these other remedies. In fact, the availability of these pension funds will, I think, prevent us from looking for more progressive and more humane solutions, where the state can essentially say to these people, well, you have this other option now. You can liquidate your pensions, rather than saying, we are going to do something about this. We do have options. We have options with home care. We have options with farmer care. We have options with energy. We have options with educational options. We can provide you with financial advice. We can provide you with community service support. We can do a whole range of other things. And I'm afraid that allowing for this bill to pass would mean that we will stop looking at those solutions and put the onus principally on people who are least able to afford it and to tolerate it, and will effectively be clawing back their assets, will be liquidating their assets, and in effect taking away a safety net that was designed to support them in hard times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate the opportunity to stand here today and speak on Bill 68, which I believe was brought to the House with good intention by the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party. I, too, have had an opportunity in a short time as a new MLA to bear witness to some of the situations that would ultimately see people want to access their pension funds. I, too, as well, have aging parents who experience undue hardships. Like many of my colleagues have talked about, increasing costs for health care. My parents live in a rural setting, so there's gas prices that they're constantly battling with on their fixed income. Car repairs, traveling to the city for your medical plans. There's a whole host of reasons why somebody at that age would want to or have to find themselves in a situation where they'd be tempted to take their savings that they had so long and hard worked for over the years to save and relish for a much better time, maybe to pass on, like my honourable colleague from Dartmouth East said, to their children. I want to go back to and touch on, Mr. Speaker, one of the early situations that I found myself in. Having so many of these cases come into the office, I seek the assistance of a financial advisor to give out some free advice to people that had found themselves in that need, or of asking myself, what can I do, Trevor? What can I do to relinquish some of my pensions? I have money here. I don't have enough to live on, whether it be through my pension, my disability pension, or the social service program that I currently am under. So I sought out the help of an investor, and without citing any company names or any client's name, this gentleman in particular came into my office and sat down at great length with this particular advisor, and left my office quite pleased at the attention that he had gotten and some of the advice that he had gotten. And when I later met with the financial advisor, his expression to me, Mr. Speaker, was, I understand the situation that this gentleman's in. He is on a disability pension. He's a single person, so there's only so much money's allotted. He is unable to work. His rents are increasing. He can't afford to eat. He can't afford to buy a pair of shoes. And he too felt the frustration that many of us do feel in these situations. But Mr. Speaker, I think the most important thing that this financial advisor had said to me and later conveyed to this gentleman was, Trevor, I would love to be able to see this gentleman receive the hard monies that he had saved for over the years. But Trevor, I must warn you, he said, I am scared. I would be scared to relinquish this gentleman's savings to him now, because he had struggled for so many years without money. This financial advisor was unsure as to how that money would actually be spent. And Mr. Speaker, rightfully so. Somebody that's gone without for so many years and finds themselves in need of that little bit of extra. I honestly believe they would potentially dwindle those funds. And therein lies the problem, Mr. Speaker. Like my honourable colleague from Halifax Needham suggested, perhaps more programming is necessary, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. There's way too much noise in the chamber. It's very difficult for the speaker to hear the speaker. So I would ask if there's any members that wants to pursue their discussion to take it outside the chamber. Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague from Halifax Needham, I think, summed up the whole thoughts and consensus of this caucus. I think that, bringing this bill forward would be a Band-Aid approach to an even bigger problem. We honestly have to sit back and ask ourselves, how do people get into these situations? And I want to applaud the government, after the June election for opening up a portfolio that's going to be dedicated to looking into seniors' issues. And I want to encourage the government to continue working hard and really investigating why people find themselves in those situations. But like my colleague from Halifax Needham had suggested, that perhaps if other programs were in place, if more assistance was given to people that found themselves in this need, we wouldn't have the problems, or we wouldn't have to bring up bills such as Bill 68 to remedy problems that are short-term, Mr. Speaker. And I, you know, my honourable colleague suggested gambling. You know, if we go to our local casinos, Mr. Speaker, I see an incredible amount of seniors that are visiting and frequenting our seniors. Matter of fact, a lot of our senior centres do day trips to our casinos. And ask ourselves why. Our senior population finds themselves lonely. This is a way to get out. But what would stop them from tapping into an income fund or an RSP to, you know, exhaust that completely, to feed that habit? And Mr. Speaker, in talking about programs, if programs were in place, such as Bill 68, if we let somebody do this, we have to honestly think it's a short-term Band-Aid approach that would enable someone to access funds for whatever reason. And the superintendent might not know that somebody that's proposing this has a gambling addiction, a drinking addiction. They come up with a reason that's viable, it fits the policy, and the money's extended. But then, Mr. Speaker, the money is gone. It disappears. So we have another problem, Mr. Speaker. Once again, we have to go and ask ourselves, how did we take care of this person? How did we take care of this family? Why is this family in this situation? Well, Mr. Speaker, if today we moved on with Bill 68 as is, I would have to say that too is or would be part of the problem, Mr. Speaker. I think governments, not just the government of today, but future governments, really has to investigate as to reasons why our social fabric has changed, why we consistently cut programs that deal with social natures that don't really enable our people, especially the most vulnerable. And as we go through society now, it's an aging population, Mr. Speaker, and I can honestly say that I consider myself fortunate now. But if I was to walk out today and something drastically happened, that I couldn't return to my place of employment, and I need the government to take care of me, I would not want to have to find myself ever in need to exhaust any funds that I had tucked away and saved to try to pass on to my family or my future children. I would not want to have to tap into that, and I don't think it's necessary if governments provide those all too crucial social programs, Mr. Speaker. So on that note, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to take my place in hopes that if Bill 68 goes forward, we can indeed tighten it and really look at the extent of the regulations and the powers that a superintendent would have, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on Bill 68, and it's unfortunate that this bill is necessary to even be introduced into the legislature, because it's a symptom of a broad array of problems in this province that are causing difficulties for families and for individuals of all ages. It's interesting, in the recommendations that come out of the task force on positive aging, which is called the Strategy for Positive Aging in Nova Scotia, which was released in the fall, I believe, of 2005. It's mentioned there that already, currently, 39% of individuals before retirement age are making RSP withdrawals. Now, I think this is an indication of the struggle that people are having to make ends meet. And it's not a surprise that some of the national surveys have shown that the gap between the rich and the poor in Nova Scotia is greater than almost any other province in Canada. And of course, if there's a gap between the rich and the poor, the impact on women is even greater. It's a fact of life in Nova Scotia that women who are expected and who willingly provide loving, nurturing care
to members of their family are impacted financially because of that caring nature. And the expectation is there from government that they will be there to fill those positions. As a result, many women in our province have to take lower paying jobs. They work part-time, they work on a casual basis, and many of them don't have access to employee or employer provided pensions. And so during their entire lifetime, they live on less money than men. In fact, women earn 70 cents for every dollar that men do in this province, and the impact in their retirement years is considerable. I remember a number of years ago, I was the acting coordinator for a provincial organization called Canadian Pensioners Concerned. And day after day, we heard heart-rending stories from seniors, mostly women, talking about the choices they're forced to make every single day. I remember being actually moved to tears at many of their stories, because even though at the time I was living on what would be considered a fairly low income, these women, the choices they had to make were unbelievable choices. Between paying their power bill and buying a small birthday gift for a loved grandchild. This is very unreasonable, and senior women are continuing to have to make these tough choices today. It's a fact of life that in this province, Cabinet does not have a gender lens on the regulations and policies that they create in the province. And perhaps it's unintended, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but the unintended consequence is that the negative impact on women is quite high. If you look at policies like early release from hospital, day surgery, the government is expecting women in the communities to be looking after people who have surgery that day and come out. Many daughters and, daughters-in-law, sisters, are taking time off work, in fact, actually leaving paid employment to provide long-term care to people who come out of hospital, or actually, many of them are actually providing care in the hospital because there aren't sufficient resources to provide the trained professionals to look after loved ones in the hospital. I talked more recently on Wednesday about the child care crisis in this province, and I referred to the fact that many older women are leaving their volunteer positions in community organizations in order to stay home and look after grandchildren because of the lack of affordable and quality child care in this province. Many communities, many counties in Nova Scotia do not have one regulated child care space in the whole area. That is a disgrace. And it means that women are leaving jobs, not taking promotions, or having to leave volunteer positions in order to look after these children. It's interesting that another one of the observations in the Strategy for Positive Aging in Nova Scotia, they're reflecting on the labour market trend, which is suggesting that employers are moving away from sponsoring pension plans, because what they're doing is deliberately hiring part-time, casual, and contract workers so that they don't have to provide pension benefits. We're not anticipating yet the long-term impact of this on the financial stability of families and retirees in this province, but there will be a price to pay. I also want to mention that the unique needs of persons with disabilities. The rates of unemployment among people with disabilities in this province is very, very high, especially among women. And without providing the social safety network in this province of adequate programs and services for seniors, for persons with disabilities, for women who are struggling to make ends meet, we are just worsening the problem, allowing people to to access their pension plans and other savings before retirement, I think is covering up the fact that the planning and the strategies are not in place from this government to look after them in their short-term needs. And the long-term impact is going to be so severe. I also want to mention the growing number of seniors. Do you realize that by 2026, our senior population is going to increase by 80% in Nova Scotia? 25% of our population will be seniors, people over the age of 65. And when you add to the fact that, I mean, part of this is based on the fact that life expectancy is increasing and the birth rate is declining. So we have some serious, we need to give serious deliberation and thought to the long-term impacts of some of the current sort of short, easy, simplistic solutions that we might be seeing to some of these problems. And so I'm suggesting that Bill 68 is perhaps an excuse not to develop a long-term strategy to deal with some of the serious social and financial problems that families are suffering in this province. And certainly I support our party's position that we need to give a better deal for today's families. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to point out to members opposite and the members of the third party the value of being in a caucus that can stand in their place on a Friday afternoon and have their say in an important issue. I want to remind them that's why we're here. That's why the member from Halifax Needham has stood in her place and clearly pointed out that this is a Bill 68. It is my friend from Pictou West reminded me. Now there's a bill that has a number that perhaps we should remember. Bill 68. You know, it's like that hockey number, Mr. Speaker. Nobody wants to wear number 13. Well, maybe we should bring legislation forward in this House that we shouldn't have a Bill 68. This is bad government policy. It's bad public policy. It's a policy that will be questioned as this bill proceeds through to law amendments. I want to thank the members of my caucus for standing in their place this afternoon and bringing forward their concerns in this piece of legislation. I congratulate you all, and I wish you a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize the Honourable Liberal Leader to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again allow me to thank the Government House Leader and his colleagues for calling forward Bill 68, and I certainly want to thank the Minister of Environment and Labour for his comments on this bill. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate some of the comments that have been made. Let me reiterate again, Mr. Speaker, this bill is coming forward because Nova Scotians asked for the ability to do this. It's not government dictating it to them. It's not the Liberal caucus dictating to them. It is Nova Scotians that have come forward and said that under specific financial hardship and other specific circumstances, they want to have this ability to be able to access these locked-in RRSPs. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I heard the member from Halifax Citadel, and, you know, I will keep in mind the fact he hasn't been here for long, but if he thinks that Nova Scotians who are trying to access locked-in RRSPs under our current system is easy or is efficient or is working, I encourage you to work with those people, because I spent 4 to 5 years on one case with a gentleman. If you think it's easy, you should go ask his family what they went through. It's not working. It's extremely difficult, and what we're trying to do here is make sure that there is a process in place that under specific circumstances, Mr. Speaker, the superintendent of pensions will be able to access, allow these people to access a portion of these funds. Mr. Speaker, again, I look forward to this bill. Moving on to law amendments, as I said, this is currently in place in 2 other provinces. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, we need to have confidence in Nova Scotians. And for a party to stand in this place and basically say we have no confidence in Nova Scotians to make their own financial decisions, I find it's unfortunate. And Mr. Speaker, I believe this bill with the regulations will allow the safeguards in place necessary to make sure that no one is reckless in any way in regards to these funds. But with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to see Bill 68 is moving forward. Regardless of the number of the actual bill, I believe that's irrelevant, almost to the point of being childish. But the fact is, and it's an important piece of legislation that deals with concerns that impact the lives of Nova Scotians, regardless of whatever number may be attached to that bill. I think it's a good bill. It's something my constituents have asked for, and after what I've seen they've gone through, I think this will make the lives better for Nova Scotians at a time when they need it most. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would close the debate on Bill number 68.
Thank you. The motion before the House is for a second reading on Bill number 68. Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Nay. Motion carried.
Bills. Bill 68, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 340 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Pension Benefits Act.
Order that this bill be referred to Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I would now move that the House adjourn to meet on Tuesday coming at the hour of 12 o'clock, and the House would sit for 8 hours till 8 p.m. The order of business to be considered on that day would be public bills for second reading. That's 12 noon for clarification. The order of business would be public bills for second reading, public bills in Committee of the Whole House.
Flashback.
Yes, yes. Deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra said. Private members' public bills for second reading. I believe those will be the three orders of business. Thank you.
Thank you. The motion before the House is for the House to rise and meet again on Tuesday at 12 noon. The House will sit Tuesday between 12 noon and 8 p.m. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those against, motion carried. The House stands adjourned until 12 noon on Tuesday.